The night roared with wind and rain, the kind of storm that made the pines groan and the earth itself seem to shudder. Cold mud sucked at Elias's boots with every step, and the sodden weight of his worn satchel dug into his shoulder. His breath came in short bursts, swallowed by the howl of the gale. He kept his head down, hood drawn, eyes scanning the shadows for shelter. Then movement. Just ahead, in the wavering curtain of rain, a small shape lay half-buried in the muck. He stopped, heart lurching. An arrow jutted from a nearby pine, its feathers trembling in the wind. Another stuck at an angle in the dirt. Whoever this was, they hadn't simply fallen. They'd been hunted. He stumbled forward, kneeling beside the figure. It was a girl, no older than 12, her skin cold, her dark hair matted with rain. She stirred faintly, a shallow breath escaping her lips. Elias didn't know her people, but leaving her here would be a death sentence. The frontier had no room for innocence. In the late 1800s, the land between the edge of settler towns and the tribal territories was a place of broken treaties, sudden violence, and bitter grudges that burned hotter than any fire. Raids and retaliations blurred the line between who was prey and who was predator. Elias knew this too well. His parents had fallen ill and died after a settler skirmish drove them from their home. At 14, he'd been alone, earning scraps by trapping, hunting, and working for anyone who didn't care where he came from. He'd learned quickly that trust was as scarce as bread. And yet, here was a girl, helpless in the mud. He slid his arms beneath her and lifted. She was lighter than he expected, her head lolling against his chest. The icy rain stung his face as he staggered toward the one place he knew was close enough to reach before hypothermia claimed her. An abandoned trapper's cabin sat a few hundred yards away, hidden in a grove of spruce. The roof sagged and half the shutters hung loose, but it was dry inside. He kicked the door in, the hinges groaning in protest. The air smelled of mildew and old wood smoke. He lowered her onto a pile of furs in the corner, brushing wet hair from her forehead. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow but steady. The arrow marks outside burned in his mind. Someone had meant to kill her, and might still be looking. Elias moved fast. He found kindling, coaxed a fire to life in the stone hearth, and peeled off his soaked coat to drape over her. The cabin's roof moaned under the storm, the wind pressing against it like a living thing. He ventured out only briefly, foraging in the half-collapsed pantry where he found a rusted tin of beans and a pouch of jerky. The wilderness was never quiet for long. As night deepened, the distant, mournful howls of wolves floated through the rain, threading between the thunderclaps. Elias tightened the latch on the door, his hand lingering on the wood. Wolves wouldn't trouble him much, but the men who loosed those arrows might. Sleep wouldn't come. He sat beside the girl, turning the problem over in his mind. Helping her beyond tonight was dangerous. She might belong to a tribe that hated settlers, and to them, he was nothing but another pale-skinned trespasser. Worse, whoever had chased her could return with more men. The smart choice was to leave at dawn and never look back. But in the wavering light of the fire, her face reminded him of someone else, his younger sister Anna. She'd been about this girl's age when fever took her. He'd promised her, the night she died, that he'd always protect the small and the helpless. The memory caught in his chest like a thorn. By morning, the rain had slowed to a sullen drizzle. He helped the girl sip water, and she managed to stay awake long enough to whisper her name, Ayoka. No more than that. He packed what little food he had left, wrapped her in a blanket, and guided her into the gray light. Their journey was slow, the land soaked and heavy beneath their feet. Rivers swelled with runoff, forcing them to cross at treacherous shallows where the current clawed at their legs. The forest loomed high and dark around them, dripping with a night's storm, each step muffled by sodden leaves. They spoke little. Elias didn't know her language, and she seemed too weary for words. Still, there were signs of trust. Her hand gripping his sleeve when the river pulled too hard. The way she matched his pace without needing to be urged. He read meaning in her glances, in the way she began to walk closer, no longer keeping a wary distance. By the second evening, the air had shifted, warmer, tinged with wood smoke. The trail dipped between two steep ridges, and through the mist Elias saw it. A hidden valley dotted with fires, the faint shapes of lodges and smoke rising in soft, pale columns into the sky. Ayoka's step quickened. She looked up at him, eyes bright for the first time, and for a moment he felt the strange weight of what he was about to walk into. And still, he followed her down. The night first sound that reached them from the valley, the kind of storm that made the pines groan. It carried and the earth itself seemed to shudder, soft and disbelieving, sucked at Elias's like a memory trying to take form. And then came the shouting, worn satchel voices calling Ayoka's name. His breath came broke into a run before Elias could react. The howl of the gale. The blanket slipping he kept his head down, hood drawn, down the slope, eyes scanning the shadows between the lodges. Then and a woman sprinted forward, just ahead, her braids wavering curtain of rain, her face crumpling. A small shape lay half buried hit her mother's arms with a sob, heart clutching her so tightly an arrow jutted from a nearby pine. Elias feathers trembling in the wind, watching the way the two sank to the ground. Dirt. Whoever this in a rush of words, they hadn't simply fallen. Other villagers gathered. Their expression shifting from astonishment to wariness as their eyes was a girl landed no on him. Older than 12. He stayed where he was, cold, boots her dark hair matted with rain, unsure if he'd be welcomed or ordered away. A shallow breath, one of the older men approached. Elias didn't know her. Elias guessed from the resemblance, but leaving her here would be a death sentence. And the way the girl clung to his side had no room for innocence. He looked Elias over for a long moment. The land between the edge of settler towns and the tribal territories was a place of broken treaties. Others, sudden violence, muttered low bitter grudges that burned casting glances like thrown stones. Raids and retaliations blurred the line between who was prey, but no one was sat beside him. Elias conversations dropped to silence. His parents had fallen ill and died the air after between a settler skirmish carried the brittle tension of broken history. At 14, settlers and natives had traded too many deaths trapping to see only the boy and working for anyone who didn't care Elias where he came from. Quietly. He'd learned quickly that trust to the far side of the fire, where a tall man stood. Here was a girl, motionless, helpless, his arms crossed. He slid his face was shadowed by the flicker of flame. She was lighter than he expected, and unreadable. Her head lolling. The man was introduced. The icy rain stung his face. He didn't speak. As he staggered toward the one place he knew was close enough to reach. Elias got the sense he was being measured. An abandoned trapper's and for the moment at a few hundred yards away, Kaya's presence was in a grove of spruce, like a blade laid across a table, and half the shutters hung loose, full of meaning. But it was dry inside. 2 days later, he kicked the door in, to grim the hinges groaning in protest. Returned with word the air smelled of mildew moving along the river. They lowered her onto a pile of furs trading post upriver, brushing wet hair from her forehead. They weren't loyal to either side. Her breathing shallow but steady, and with arrow marks outside burned in his mind. The stories were ugly. Someone had meant to kill her. Vanished, men might still be looking. Children traded like stolen horses. He found kindling around the fire that night. A fire to life father told Elias plainly, and peeled off his soaked coat to drape over her. Sooner than the cabin's roof moaned under the storm. Before they do, the wind pressing against it not like unkind, but final. He ventured out Elias only thought of leaving, foraging in the half-collapsed pantry where he found a rusted tin of beans who he was, and a pouch of jerky. But the image of Ayoka in the mud was never arrows in the trees, burned in his mind. The next morning, mournful howls found him by the edge of the camp, rain, sharpening a small thunderclaps. Without a word, Elias, the warrior, the latch on the door, drew a line his in the hand dirt, lingering on the wood. Then traced a path through the trees trouble with him the point of his knife. But the men Elias realized arrows he was being shown trails, sleep wouldn't safe routes. He sat beside the girl. They began the problem in the morning in his mind, and though Kaya helping her beyond tonight, his instructions were clear. She might belong to a tribe that hated settlers, scuffed soil, and to them, and the faint was nothing but another man-skinned trespasser. Kaya showed him how to move whoever had chased her how to circle down more men, how to watch without being seen. To leave at dawn one afternoon and never look back. Kaya pressed something into Elias's light of the fire. Her face reminded him of someone else, strung on a strip of leather. Elias didn't know its age when fever took her. But the gesture felt heavy, deliberate. The night she died, he kept it tucked against his chest. That he'd always protect the small came when Elias least expected. The memory caught in his chest like a thorn. He was alone at the riverbank, filling a water skin. The rain when the hair on the back of his neck prickled. He helped the girl sip over stones, and she managed to stay awake long enough to whisper her name. Then an arrow hissed past his ear, no more than that, struck the tree beside him. What little food he had left flat, as another arrow bit into the mud, and guided her into the gray light. From the trees. Their journey was slow and urgent. The land Elias scrambled for the cover of the rocks. Kaya's lessons racing through his mind, forcing them to cross at treacherous shallows, stay low, the current clawed at their legs. He darted between the boulders, high and dark around behind a fallen log, with a night just storm. As a man with a pistol broke muffled by sodden leaves. Elias hurled a stone, little, striking the man's wrist and ran, and she seemed roots clawed at his boots for words as he tore through the undergrowth. There were signs of water skin thumping, her hands gripping his sleeve when the shouts behind him grew fainter. The way she matched his pace by the pounding of his own pulse. He read meaning in her glances, at the camp's edge, in the way she began to walk closer. The alarm already no longer on his tongue, keeping a wary distance. River, by the second evening, his voice the air had shifted, snapping warmer, the village into motion. With wood smoke. Men and women dipped between bows, two steep ridges, spears, and through muskets. The mist, Elias children were pulled into the valley dotted with fires. Somewhere in the confusion, the faint shapes of lodges Elias and smoke rising from the shadows, pale columns into the sky. Eyes fixed on Ioka's step, not with suspicion this time. She looked up at him, but with something bright for the first time. Approval, and for a moment, he felt the strange weight of what he was about to walk into. And still, he followed her down. The first warning came with the call of startled crows, was the laughter black wings slicing across the pale dawn. The mist, then the sound of hooves, too many to count, memory trying to rolled through the mist like distant thunder. Shouting. Elias was already awake, kneeling by the fire with Kaya, when the look passed between them. The bandits had come back, and this time they weren't just hunting strays at the river. Shadows emerged on the ridge, men with rifles slung across their backs and blades at their belts. More followed, spreading wide like wolves in the snow. Elias's chest tightened, but his hands stayed steady. The traps they'd set over the past 2 days waited for them. Hidden pits, snare lines, and sharpened stakes buried under the leaves. The first gunshot cracked the air. Villagers scattered to cover. Smoke drifted from the burning torches the raiders carried. Their war cries cutting through the valley. Kaya's voice, deep and commanding, rang out in his own language, rallying the defenders. Elias moved alongside him. The bow Kaya had lent him clutched in his hands. The bandits poured in. A man fell screaming into one of the spike traps. Another was yanked backward when his ankle caught a snare. Arrows hissed past Elias's head, some finding their mark with heavy, final thuds. He loosed a shaft at a man charging the lodges and saw him drop mid-stride. Gunfire echoed from the trees, splintering wood and scattering bark in deadly showers. The air was thick with smoke, sweat, and the copper tang of blood. Elias ducked behind an overturned wagon, reloading, heart pounding in his ears. He caught sight of Kaya across the clearing, moving like water through the chaos, his blade a flash of steel. A break opened in the fighting. An unguarded trail leading straight into the trees. Elias froze. He could run now, slip away, survive. No one would blame him. But then the smoke seemed to twist, forming the memory of his parents' coughing fits, of his sister's small hand going cold in his own. If he ran now, the screams behind him would be theirs all over again. He let the thought of escape burn away. Turning, he sprinted toward the fight. Kaya was locked with two raiders near the central fire. One went down with an arrow through the chest, but the second leveled a rifle at Kaya's back. Elias didn't think. He moved. His bow was empty, so he flung himself forward, slamming into the man's arm. The shot went wide, tearing a splinter from a lodge post. They grappled in the dirt, the man's breath hot and foul, his knife flashing in the smoke. Elias caught the wrist, twisted hard, and drove his shoulder into the man's chest. The knife fell. Kaya's blade was there an instant later, and the bandit crumpled. For the first time, Kaya looked at him, not with the measured stillness he always wore, but with something fierce and unguarded. "Brother," he said, one word, but it struck like the weight of an oath. The bandits broke not long after, dragging their wounded, leaving the dead where they fell. Shouts of victory rose from the lodges, mingled with the wails for the lost. Smoke still curled from a burned wagon, and the smell of gunpowder lingered like a warning. Elias slept where he fell, exhaustion heavier than the night air. When the sun was high, he woke to silence. For a moment he thought the battle had been a fever dream. Then he stepped outside the small lodge they'd given him, and stopped. 30 warriors stood in a ring around his door, all armed, all silent, faces unreadable. They did not move as he emerged, but their presence was not a threat. It was a wall, a promise, a guard of honor. Elias felt the weight of it settle on him like a mantle he had not asked for, but could not set down. That night, as the fires burned low, Elias sat alone on the edge of the valley. The talisman Kaya had given him hung against his chest. He could leave tomorrow, fade back into the forest, return to the life of no ties and no promises. It would be easier, safer, but when he thought of the girl running into her mother's arms, of the way the warriors had stood in silence for him, of Kaya's voice calling him brother, he knew he would stay. For now, trust was fragile, but worth the risk. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness becomes the loudest echo in history. Water skin thumping against his side. The shouts behind him grew fainter, replaced by the pounding of his own pulse. He burst from the trees at the camp's edge, gasping, the alarm already on his tongue. Bandits, river, armed! His voice carried, snapping the village into motion. Men and women reached for bows, spears, and muskets. Children were pulled into the lodges. Somewhere in the confusion, Elias saw Kaya step from the shadows, bow in hand, eyes fixed on him. Not with suspicion this time, but with something sharper. Approval,